Welcome to SORMAG's Writers Café, where we share the real writer's life over a cup of friendship, sprinkled with laughter and wisdom. My name is LaShaunda Hoffman, and I'm your host. This episode's sponsor is Building Your Readership by LaShaunda Hoffman, a new Kindle book. Are you ready to become a social butterfly? Inside this new episode book, LaShaunda shares 10 ways to start building your readership and increase your book sales as you learn how to be consistent with your book promotion. Each episode includes action steps to implement to help you become a social butterfly. Check the show notes for the link. All right. Today, sitting at the cafe with me is Miss Olivia Almagro and Steve Bellinger. Welcome.
Good evening.
Thank you.
We are going to start with Miss Olivia. Please tell us about you, your books, what you write now, and anything else you want to share.
Okay. Well, my name is Olivia Almagro, and I live in Miami, sunny Florida. I wrote a book called The Fortunate Fall. I actually wrote it a couple of years ago, and was really in a very dark space, and my therapist suggested that I write a book to kind of keep my mind from dwelling on the grief that I was dealing with. I had lost two best friends in the same year. My boyfriend of several years, we went our separate ways, and just was torn by love and grief, and decided to write the book. I am a publicist, so I usually don't do this. So in terms of interviews, I'm usually behind the scenes. I've been a publicist for 20-plus years, and I've worked with primarily with authors, published authors, self-published, independent authors, startups, and, different industries. So I've been fortunate to have a very a wonderful career in PR, and decided to write a book, and it's been pretty interesting. And I'm also an adjunct professor as well. So I wear multiple hats.
How's that way?
May I ask, where are you a professor?
At Miami-Dade College.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to read us an excerpt or give us a blurb of your book?
Yeah, I can tell you. So the book is it is a crime thriller, and it's about a man who is an employer. He is a husband. He's a father, and he pretty much wreaks havoc on the lives of those he comes into contact with. And his employee accuses him of embezzlement. Her name was forged, and he basically goes after her. And she's not the only one. He's also dealing with enemies outside of the workplace, along with folks that are inside of the workplace. And he goes after his victims, and at the same time, his victims are, navigating through their own personal lives. They're dealing with different issues, but nothing compares to what they have to deal with in terms of Roger Williams, who is he's the villain in the book. But there are a lot of central themes: love, friendship, mental health. And so it was really important to focus on, those areas as well, because I'm the type of person, I love to write about romance, and, I like romance books and historical fiction. So this was a little different for me. But so for me, in order for me to enjoy it, I had to incorporate, so there's the suspense, there's the thriller part, there's the crime, but there's also love and friendship. And so, the readers are definitely taken on a roller coaster ride. And the feedback has been pretty interesting. And I think it's amazing when you can, when you have a story in your head and then you actually start writing it and it's done, and then to have people say, oh, I liked your book, and they're asking questions about the characters. And so it's just been a very, very interesting experience being on this side, being an author. But I'm certainly enjoying it. I'm very humble. I'm just so happy to know that I actually did it. I actually wrote the book. It took me about a year to write the book. Again, I was going through tremendous loss. Lost my job. My dog of 16 years passed away. So I was in a very, very dark space. And, when my therapist mentioned to me that he wanted me to write, I just thought, okay. And I went home that evening thinking like, what should I do? And then literally like the next 2 days, the story just started unfolding. It just started coming out. And I spent about a year writing it. And then halfway through, I started feeling overwhelmed. I mean, I knew the story. I had the story down. But I just, when you spend so many hours a day, I wasn't working, so I was home, and you spent several hours a day writing the story, I just started feeling a little overwhelmed. And I reached out to a couple of people a few people in my writers group, and I mentioned that I was looking for accountability partner. And the young lady from Portland, Oregon said, hey, I'll be your accountability partner. And we basically, every week, we met through Skype or FaceTime. And she read my chapters. I would read her chapters. And, she helped me get through the hump. And she was writing a memoir. And so very similar in nature, that the story was very dark. And so we definitely had a lot in common in terms of where we were at that particular moment, in the space that we were in, both of us. And I definitely tell her that it was divine. It was like she was chosen to be my accountability partner. And and so here I am now.
What was the highlight of writing this book for you?
I think the highlight was just being able to transfer something that's in your head to the paper, to the computer. I think that was the highlight. And just being so engrossed in the characters. I'm sorry. Just being engrossed in the characters and just getting attached to the characters. Like even the villain, I was really torn about, his fate. And there were a couple of characters in the book where I knew that their timing was coming, and I was just distraught. And which was interesting because I spoke to quite a few people, and they told me, yeah, that happens when you're writing. You become so attached to your characters. But at the same time, I didn't want to take away from who they were in the book. I didn't want to impact how I was feeling. I wanted to really, truly show exactly who they were in the book. And I tried my best because I was like, okay, he's a villain, but at times I felt sorry for the character, which is interesting because a reader told me, she asked me, she was like, did you want to, she was like, you mentioned about the mental illness towards the end, and she said, did you want to, she said, I wasn't sure if you wanted us to feel sorry for him. And I thought that was quite interesting, although I did actually, it was hinted early in the earlier chapters. But I just thought that was interesting that she said that, because that was sort of like my fear. I didn't want to put my own personal feeling. I wanted to stay true to the character, in which other readers told me, like, yeah, he is a villain. He's a horrible person. And so that was a great thing, to know that people were able to, get that feeling like he is just, I had quite a few of the readers tell me that they were yelling, they were shouting. Sometimes they had to put the book away because they were so upset with him. So that's always fascinating to hear from the readers and get their perspective and their interpretation of your writing. So I guess I would say that that's pretty much the highlight.
It's a good highlight because you want your characters to affect readers, and so
right.
when they're like, I hate him, you did your job.
Oh yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. If you read the reviews, they're like, I hated that character so much. And it's interesting because my therapist said to me, she said, no, not she, it was a he. He said that. What is it that he loves the most? And I was like, oh, he's a horrible person. And he was like, yeah, but those type of people, there's always someone that they love. And so you want to make sure that, it's depicted that way, or that there's something that they're very close to. And so, and that's when I decided that it would be his children, his sons.
Yeah, I don't think people are always mean. They, at one point, they turn that way, I think.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Steve, you ready to tell us about who you are and what you write?
Oh, well, absolutely. I started as a young child. My mom was a single mom, worked at a book company, a printing company. She would bring home books for us to read. One day she brought a book entitled I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. I was maybe 10 years old, read that, fell in love with science fiction. Over the years, I've written everything from radio drama to fan fiction, this science fiction novel, and even Sunday school lessons. I've been writing all my life and trying in one way or another to get my stuff out there. Now, the Chronocar, which is my first novel, I've got 4 so far, and they're all part of a series. But the Chronocar is is entitled The Chronocar: An Urban Adventure in Time. It's a time travel story that starts with the son of a slave. The son of a slave is a man with the mind of a genius who figures out time travel, but nobody wants to believe him. He can't get his he gets his plans published in an obscure novel, in an obscure journal, Then in the year 2015, a black IIT student finds the plans, builds a Chronocar, goes back to visit the doctor in the year 1919 on the south side of Chicago. But unfortunately, that is the year of the Red Summer riots, and he gets involved with the riots. So I call this science fiction for people who don't like science fiction, because most people don't know what science fiction really is. And I do have to say, the Chronocar has won a few awards, one of which is the reader's favorite. It was the reader's favorite gold medal winner for young adult science fiction. And in 2018, I was actually at the Miami-Dade Book Fair as part of winning this award. So, and again, I see these things as challenges. Somebody once asked me, well, it's a great book, Steve. You ever thought about doing an audiobook? Well, I figured out how to get that done. I found a publisher to do an audiobook. Someone else said, well, Steve, this will make a great movie. So I've written a screenplay that came in, that became a finalist in a contest. So we just keep fighting it, just keep doing it. So I have 4 novels, and they're all standalone novels, but there is an underlying theme. My book is in libraries all over the place. It's actually in the university archives of my alma mater. And the whole trick to my characters is that in each one of the books, the main character is basically me. The Chronocar is me when I was in college. I wrote a novel called Epocalypse, which is sort of a techno thriller, and that character is me now as a quote-unquote elderly curmudgeon. But I write because I enjoy it. I write what I like, and fortunately, a lot of people like what I like also.
So are you going to read us an excerpt?
Would you like to hear an excerpt?
Yes,
well, here's an excerpt of the Chronocar. The main character, Tony Carpenter, has gone back in time to meet the doctor, the gentleman who invented the time machine, and he also meets the doctor's daughter. And her name is Ollie, and she's curious about what the future is like. Okay, so let's see. Tony reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Ollie furrowed her brows in confusion. What's that? A phone. You have telephones, right? Well, we don't have one, but I have seen them. That tiny thing can't be a telephone. Where's the wire? It's a phone with no wires. And it's a camera, too. I'll show you. He stepped back a couple of feet and pointed it at her. She jumped at the flash. It's okay. I just took your picture. Look. He turned the screen towards her. Oh, my God. It's all color. It's a miracle. No, Tony says, it's future technology. Can I see? She sat down on the edge of the bathtub and examined the device. Show me how the telephone part works. Well, it won't work here, but I can show you more pictures. Tony sat next to her and cycled through the pictures of his family and friends as he told her about life in the future. Television that allows you to see moving pictures in color without having to go to a theater. She did not seem to get that, so Tony showed her a video of Jimmy playing table tennis with some guy and explained how back home he could view movies on a screen 5 feet wide. He tried to explain computers and the internet, but it was too much for her. So you're also advanced. I bet you don't have any sickness anymore. I bet you don't have any sickness anymore, right? I bet you don't have any wars or poverty either. There was excitement in her voice. It must be a wonderful place. Not quite, Tony solemnly explained that in his time there were crazy, incurable diseases that scared the hell out of everybody, and there always seemed to be a war somewhere. And homelessness was a growing problem. Nearly everyone worried about overpopulation, using up all of the oil and other natural resources, and polluting the land, water, and the air. Seems like y'all spend more time and money entertaining yourselves instead of helping each other and solving your problems. Not much to look forward to. She looked Tony in the eye. You know, I read some stories about the future, and Daddy always talks about it, and I dreamed about what it might be like. I used to feel bad that I might not live long enough to see everything that was to come. But from what you say, I think I like it better right here and now. She stood. All right, come on. The cot downstairs is ready for you to get some sleep. I'll put some water in the tub, and you can take a bath. I'll get you one of Daddy's nightgowns. Just leave your clothes on the floor, and I'll wash them for you. Thank you, Tony said sheepishly as he followed her out of the bathroom. You know what? Ollie said without looking back. You can keep your future. So the point of that is that if you've ever watched any movie, you ever heard of a film called 2001: The Space Odyssey?
Mm-hmm.
It came out in 1968, and when that film was made, they thought that in 2001 we would have hotels orbiting the Earth and trips going to and from the moon, like traveling from here to Europe or whatever. But the future is never quite what you think it's going to be, and that's what's happening here. Ollie was thinking that the future would be all beautiful and nice, and it really isn't. So it's sort of a wake-up call.
Yeah. What inspired this story for you?
Oh, well, I've always loved time travel. I had science fiction. I had the idea of a time travel story, and it had to be black-oriented. I know we talked about historical fiction, because I did a couple of years of research to make this story as accurate and believable as possible. Because I don't know if you're familiar with the Red Summer riots in Chicago. A young man was drowned on the white side of the beach, and and everything comes from that. And that's what happens in this story. I fictionalize it a little bit, but I wanted to write a time travel story. I also wanted to write a time travel story that was that was accurate. A lot of time travel stories don't make any sense. For example, how can you travel to the future when it really doesn't exist yet? And that's part of the theme of this story. How can you be in a time machine and sit there and watch the world change around you when, if you go back 1 hour in time, you're at a location where the Earth, well, it's kind of hard to explain, but a lot of people really get into the time travel theory of the book, and I use a trick that Isaac Asimov taught me, in that you always start off with some real science, and then you build into the fictional part. And I've had a number of people, a lot of people, who say they don't like science fiction, but they loved Chronocar.
I think they think of the science part instead of the fiction part, so they miss it because of that. Because I didn't think I liked science fiction, but I loved all the Star Trek shows, and I loved what was what is this? I can't. It's something that jumped into the future. I'm listening to you, and I'm reminded of one of my favorite movies when I was a teenager. Was Back to the Future. Back to the Future. I love it. They was in a time car, time machine car. So I'm like, oh wow.
And I would argue with you that Back to the Future is not really science fiction, because the story is not about the science. It's about him being in a different place, and the things that happen don't really make sense. It's fun. It's a great movie. Star Wars is not science fiction by any definition. My definition of science fiction is a story where the science, whether it's real or imaginary, is so much a part of the story that without it, the story would fall apart. Based on that, Star Wars falls apart, does not work as science fiction, and about half of Star Trek is not science fiction. And mind you, I'm the world's biggest and oldest Trekkie. You're talking to a man who used to go to conventions, and I own 2 uniforms.
Okay, so what would you call that? What is the genre then? What is it called instead of science?
It is space opera.
Okay. Well, I'm asking you this because I am currently working on, I just found out that it was called space opera a couple of weeks ago, and my people moved to another planet. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to avoid the scientists in it, so that's why I'm like, I need to take that word off then, because I don't want it, because they live close to the sun. That's the most science I got.
Okay. Well, and
everything else is my imagination.
And there's a place for that. When you watch Star Wars, the science doesn't make any sense. They don't try to explain it. It's just there to keep it exciting. If you look at the basic story of Star Wars, they could use metal swords and wooden ships and tell the same story. They even call themselves Jedi Knights. The only difference is that it takes place in outer space with lightsabers. Some people call Harry Potter science fiction.
In genres, I really do. I think that I had a hard time with people who say they write romance and they didn't have a happy ever after, and I'm like, that's not a romance, because romance. I was like, well, they have a happily, they they was happy. No. And so that's why I'm really picky about what terminology I use for my story, because I'm like, someone told me that I couldn't not to use urban science fiction because it's it's set in a what is it? Dystopia time frame or something like that for urban. So I was like, oh, okay. But I think as a writer, you really need to know the terminologies, because you don't want someone to buy your book and they're looking for the science and they're like, all she talked about was the sun and got nothing to do with science,
Well,
and then that's the bad review you get because you didn't write what you said you were writing.
Well, I sort of cheated with the Chronocar, because there is a lot of science in how time travel works in the story. In the story, I only explained enough for you to follow the plot. At the very end, the epilogue is a paper written by the doctor to be submitted to a science journal that explains it all in detail. So the geeks can read that last bit and be happy with it. You can read the entire story and skip over that and not even worry about it. So there's something for everybody.
Well, I'm definitely interested in both of you guys' books. Or something. They both sound really good. My question for you is, what has surprised you most about being a published author?
You want me to go first, or?
You can if you want.
I was shocked as heck that people liked what I wrote, because I wrote what I like. I didn't try to do what someone else did. I didn't try to write another Star Wars or another time machine. I wrote my story and a type of science fiction that I like, and a lot of people seem to like it also. Like I say, the thing has won awards. Totally blew my mind.
What about you, Olivia?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes. What has surprised you most about being a published author?
It is just so. It's nothing that I could ever imagine. I mean, it is just to know that this story, this concept was in your head, and then it's out in the world for everyone to read. Sometimes I go and I'll every week I'll check my book sales, and I'm just like, I wonder who's reading it, like, who's buying it, and I don't know. I think that's what I like the most, is the fact that you can also get people's opinions, and you can write it one way and then they'll have a totally different perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's like, because when the woman asked me, she was like, did you write that? Did you say that towards the end because you wanted us to feel sorry for him? And I was thinking, like, no, how did she get that? But, I mean, I understand that it's just interesting. It's really interesting, but I guess it's, like I said, it's the highlight. Just to hear Mr. Bellinger's enthusiasm and his excitement over his book. And by the way, I am definitely going to purchase a copy of your book tonight. Although I'm not a sci-fi fan, I think that your book seems like it's a mixture. It's a perfect blend. So there is a little sci-fi. And, interesting, I think that sci-fi, not that they've lost, not to say that it's not like they're coming back, but I think, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to experience the metaverse, and, they have these VR headsets, where you can experience being in a virtual world. And it's literally like it's like the Jetsons. You're like in a, you're like in an avatar, and you're just zooming around. You can buy property, and I don't know. I think that people are going to. I think if you make that connection particularly with children and young adults, and I don't know if that's a good example. If you can connect it with like video games and their experience being connected to a different world, and connecting it with sci-fi, I think that people will definitely have maybe a stronger interest. But I like the fact that you tied it in with obviously a very important part of our history. You mentioned you made a connection with slavery and the time capsule. So I'm really looking forward to reading your book.
Well, you made a mention of virtual reality. That is actually my third novel. It's entitled Epocalypse. The digital dystopia is coming. It is a world where everyone wears those devices. In fact, they're required to wear them by law.
Wow.
and this is from someone who dealt with computers and technology for 50 years. And this is just a logical progression as to where it's going. And some people think that is my scariest book because it is so believable.
Wow. And when is that book coming out?
No, it's already there. All four of my books are already out there. They're available as audio books. In fact, that one is an excellent audio book, and paperback and whatever. And if I like to write not the same type of things. I'm not a time travel person. I'm a science fiction person. My second novel is entitled Edge of Perception, and it is a science fiction paranormal love story because it encompasses all of that. And for people who are sort of into that, it completely blows their minds because it mixes science fiction with the paranormal.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah,
and what's the name of the book again? I'm sorry. What was the name of the book again?
Well, Edge of Perception is the paranormal science fiction love story, and the other Epocalypse. Okay. That's the one about It's the one about a computer system that's sort of controlling people. All of this stuff is on my website, stevebellinger.com, and because I've got the fourth novel is actually a sequel to the Chronocar entitled Time Waits for No One, the Chronocar Chronicles. And right now I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do next. But it's actually a series. They're loosely connected, but every one stands alone. Every novel stands alone.
Okay.
Wow, interesting. I have a little excerpt. Can I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you. Okay. 5 years earlier, Rachel couldn't believe she had an interview. She had not been in front of anyone vying for a new position for 4 long years. But this time was different. This time, she already had a job, and while she made decent money, Rachel felt it was time for a change. She was ready to embark on a new opportunity and confident that she could excel in this new position as spokesperson and media liaison for the Empowerment Agency. The interview was scheduled for 6 p.m. with the executive director and the human resource manager, but they were running behind. So here she was, patiently waiting in an enclosed glass area lobby. Rachel was greeted by the receptionist, a chubby Nuri Rican named Elizabeth Reyes, with long black hair and blonde highlights. Her pink and sparkling silver nail color matched her outfit. When she walked into the room, her opaque pantyhose rubbed against her thighs and made a swishing noise. Elizabeth handed Rachel a packet of information to read, and she could see tears perch from Elizabeth's eyelids. She told Rachel that she had just received a call about her dad being rushed to the hospital. "Are you okay?" Elizabeth quickly wiped away her tears with a nod and smeared what was left of her mascara across her face. Hoping to break the awkward silence that followed, Rachel struck up a conversation and began asking her questions about the job. With a heavy accent, Elizabeth replied in a robotic manner, "Everyone is friendly, and Mr. Williams is really nice." But something didn't seem right to Rachel about her response. It sounded rehearsed. She wasn't sure if it was the news about Elizabeth's dad causing her to speak this way, or if she was simply embellishing the truth. While Rachel waited to be interviewed, Elizabeth opened up about her life, and Rachel listened intently. Elizabeth explained that she was a single mom of 3 and had moved from Spanish Harlem to Miami to be closer to her ailing uncle, who was like a father to her. But then she abruptly stopped in the middle of a conversation with a terrified look on her face. "Oh, hi, Kimberly," Elizabeth stuttered. "Rachel, this is Kimberly Goodwin, our human resource manager." Kimberly smiled and offered to escort Rachel to the conference room where the interview was to be held. She seemed startled to find Elizabeth and Rachel talking. Rachel said goodbye to the receptionist and wished her father well, and then was quickly whisked away. Kimberly was an attractive woman of Scandinavian descent in her 30s with short blonde hair. She struck Rachel as a carbon copy of the news anchor Megyn Kelly. Kimberly wore a navy pencil skirt with the pearl necklace draped around her neck and kitten pumps. When Rachel entered the conference room, Roger Williams, the executive director, stood, smiled, and shook her hand. "Roger Williams." "Rachel Gibbs, nice to meet you." "It's a pleasure meeting you." Mr. Williams stood 6'2" inches tall and had a rotund belly. His skin was the color of charred raisin. The hairline was noticeably receding with flecks of gray saturating his temples. His symmetrically round, pouty lips and broad nose were prominent features on his face, and his posture and build gave her an immediate impression of someone who once played sports. Behind the sleepy eyes, Rachel saw something mysterious and dark. He wore a well-tailored smoky gray suit, a brown leather Florsham shoes that complemented his entire outfit. Rachel saw instantly that this was a man who occupied a room the moment he entered. His presence alone demanded authority, and at times he came off as aloof. And that's it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Say we're in a bookstore. What shelf do you think your book would be on? What part of the bookstore or the library do you think your book would be in?
It's a crime thriller, so like suspense.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a crime thriller. So, yeah.
No, the reason I asked because I was very much concerned about my book being pigeonholed as African American science fiction or black science fiction, which would hide it from other people. Because I mean, it's not just black folks that enjoy the story, as would be the case with yours. I just wonder where you would find that. And so far, whatever library or bookstore it's been in, it's been on the shelf with other science fiction books. So, in fact, one bookstore had it next to Ray Bradbury. I thought I was going to go to heaven until I realized Bellinger Bradbury. It was just alphabetical. But but that's interesting. Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, it's a crime thriller, and it's interesting because a gentleman described it as an urban fiction, and I cringed because it's not an urban fiction at all, but there are characters in the book that are African American, but definitely an interesting thing is that my readers have been of all races, and they've enjoyed it.
Exactly.
And so that was something I think was quite interesting because, I'm a Black woman, and, I'm obviously writing from my life experiences. And so, I just thought that it would just be sort of, I actually didn't really, I didn't really spend time on, I want a certain type of reader. I just wrote it, but it made me feel really good that it was a story that anyone could enjoy. So I'm really happy about that as well. But, it's interesting. Toni Morrison, we had a discussion about this in Clubhouse, which is an audio app that's recently become popular. It became popular. It was developed during the pandemic. And so they have like these discussions. And Steve, you may want to go on to Clubhouse to promote your book.
I'm already a member, yeah.
You're already a member, okay.
Yeah.
So we had an interesting discussion about diversity. And, are you writing for a diverse crowd or audience? And I thought it was interesting because, and I mentioned to, the folks that were in the group, I said, Toni Morrison, if you listen to any of her interviews, she made it perfectly clear. She was like, my books, I write for Black people. She said, now, that doesn't mean that I don't think that a white person in Idaho or wherever couldn't enjoy my book. She said, but I write for Black people. And I thought that was interesting. A couple of months ago, I was just like really I don't know, I just got so obsessed with, I've always been obsessed with Toni Morrison, but I think this particular time I just really wanted to feel her energy because I was so nervous and I just needed something to calm my nerves as the book was being published, and had the opportunity to listen to some of her interviews. And, reporters would ask her, and she just made it perfectly clear, look, I write for Black people. And it's interesting because Toni Morrison's book is like, well, from The Bluest Eyes, Beloved, all of her books are just amazing. But I think for any writer, I don't think anyone really sets out to just write for a specific audience. I think it just naturally, like I said, my readers, I've had quite a few people, I have 8 reviews, and from reading the names, they seem very diverse, and some of my beta readers, and they were like, this is a story anyone could read. So, which is, I think it's a major accomplishment, because I've only lived a Black woman's life, So yeah, I think it's amazing to be able to, write a story and be able to share it to the world. And then they have their opinions and they chime in. So it's just pretty amazing.
Well, what happened with me was a little different because, I was writing for other science fiction fans. And it turns out that, non-science fiction fans like the book. Because, and I cringe when someone tried to call it Black science fiction. I call it science fiction that happens to Black people. The story, the actual story, could be told from any perspective. If I were Asian, I could tell the same story from that perspective, because science is just science. But, it just so happens that these characters are black. Which adds a flavor to it, obviously. But,
right.
and I wrote from my own point of view. So, but I do cringe when people try to call it black science fiction, because I don't like that term. At least not when it comes to my stuff.
You don't want to pigeonhole, yeah.
Exactly.
Have you read Octavia Butler's books?
I have read a couple. I'm really not a very big fan, but it's only because it's not the kind of science fiction I like. Not to knock her writing or anything. She's a great writer.
Right.
But it's not, and some people cringe when I say that. But, I mean, I'm brave enough to say that, no, I'm not really a fan of her stuff. But,
right.
I try not to be like anyone. In fact, if I can be a little bit of egotistical, I want someone to try to be like me.
Exactly. No,
I think my stories and some of my writing is a little bit on the unique side. I like to think. Forgive a little bit of ego, but I like to think that.
No, but that's hey, if that's how you feel, and I think for me, the writing experience, I wanted to write a book that I enjoy reading.
Exactly.
Exactly. So I want to ask you, Steve, how was the editing process?
Well, it's a long story. The first novel was actually picked up by a nonprofit publisher who looked at it and just really saw all of the potential. It went through 3 rounds of editing. I mean, not only just grammar and structure, but even things like, is that the kind of language they would use in that time? And one person who did a review, who reviews a lot of books, actually commented on how well it was edited. I mean, I almost challenge people to find a mistake in it. They went through it with a fine-tooth comb. All of my other books aren't nearly as nicely done, because that publisher went out of business, and I went on with another who is good but not perfect.
Wow.
But the editing process, it was the first time. It was a challenge because for someone to question everything you write until you realize they're just trying to help you. When I first joined a writers group and I shared the manuscript for the Chronocar, this one guy, first thing he said was, this line here that you've written should really be placed way over there. And of course I went, I was polite to him, and I went home saying the guy's an idiot, doesn't know what he's talking about. Then I moved the line, like he said. It is my favorite part of the damn book, pardon my French, because it was right on point. And that's when I learned to shut my mouth and listen.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's one thing to write the book, but when you go through the editing process, that's like a whole different experience. It's a very humbling experience. And I had a developmental editor. I had a line editor and a copy editor.
Exactly.
And so, and the developmental editor told me, she was like, okay, I'm going to give you, I'm going to read your manuscript, edit it, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, and then you look through it. You can either accept some of the edits or not, and then once you're done, you give it back to me, and then that's it. So when she handed me, when she sent it over, it was like 50 pages of notes. I was like, oh my God! It was like I was getting so nervous because I was like,
it's like you're in high school. Like you're in high school again. Yeah.
So I was like, oh my goodness, did she not like it? Did she not,
Exactly.
That's how I kind of felt. But her suggestions, like I said, it's a very humbling experience. You have to listen. Although there were a couple of things that I stood my ground and was like, no, I want to keep it in the book. And I think later on she realized that it was one of my characters. She just felt like that that I could easily take her out and she wouldn't be missed.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very adamant about it. She was like, you may want to take her out of there. And I'm just like, no. And the reason why I wanted to keep her in there, because I felt that this character allowed the reader an inside look of what was happening at the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other character left, like in the second chapter. And so I needed someone in there to be able to kind of explain what, at least I felt that way. And it's interesting because some of the readers were like, they loved the character. And I was like, really? Why? They were like, I just want her to win. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. So, yeah, she didn't like the character. And then she didn't like me mentioning the character's race. She said that it was, and my editor is a white woman, and she told me it was very, and it's interesting because there are parts in the book where the N-word is used.
Right.
This gentleman is in prison, and he's not a scholar, so I definitely wanted to have him express himself like any person that is in prison, so or at least close to it. But she didn't have issues, and I felt kind of like, oh my goodness, she's gonna read this. She never mentioned it. She had no issues with the N-word, but she had an issue of me mentioning the characters, and she goes, well, one instance it was the judge. I mentioned that he was white and that the jurors were white. And she said to me, you could say that his skin was alabaster, the color of, or that he had rosy cheeks. And I said, well, I have family members that have rosy cheeks.
Exactly.
And they're black.
Exactly.
And I said, I think because the defendant is black, and is a black male, I think the reader's going to want to know whether they're black or white. I think my readers are going to want to know what is the race of the jurors or the judge. So we went back and forth on that. She said it was very off-putting. And
I think about that because, with situations like that, I think about what if this were a film. I would see that the judge and the jurors were all white. It would be very clear.
Right.
And from what you're saying, it's an important part of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's why having the right editor makes a difference, because one of my questions I was going to ask Steve was that you said it went over your book with a fine tooth. Were they science fiction? Did they do science fiction books? Because that makes a difference. If somebody I wrote a historical, and the person who was editing did not get a historical, and she did not get that African Americans were back in those days for some reason that all she saw was slavery, and so we butted heads because that couldn't happen. They didn't do that. I had the girl using a certain type of bottle. They didn't have that. I'm like, lady, I'm doing the research. I didn't know what they had. Now, do you have your backup? Because I did the research. And I realized she was not my editor because I asked her, I said, do you read historical? Well, no, I don't. Then you shouldn't be editing a historical because you're not going to get the cadence. You're not going to get the way things flow, nothing. And so I was like, no. So you have to be real careful when you're dealing with editors. Some people go with editors because of the price, but is that the right editor for you? Exactly. If you're doing, I'm doing, my editor for the book that I'm working on, she's like, you really have to go back and make sure that you're not in 2020 when you're doing this book because the book is set in 3500. So she's like, I need you to go to $3,500. Because I don't think they would use envelopes. And I was like, and I realized, you know what? I'm thinking 2020, this time 2022, and it's not. You got to, if you're going to do in the future, you got to get into the future, Yeah. And so I think that that's really important. And I think the reason Olivia was having issues was because that lady did not edit African American books. So when you don't edit African American books,
right? She has, and by the way,
I don't think so. She probably edited it the way she was editing it to you, as a white woman versus a black woman. Black people, we talk about color because color is important to us. It's always, even if you have a book with all black people, they ain't all dark skinned. They different shades of colors because we all come in different shades. We're not rosy cheeks. Everybody rosy cheeks, Yeah. And that makes a difference.
Actually,
she might have.
No, I know it does. I know it does make a difference. But I have to tell you that I did my other editor. She was African American. And I think it was just a learning experience for the both of us. And I tell you, if I write another book again, I definitely have her edit again. I think she did a great job. Like I said, I think it was just a learning experience. And I think she just wanted to. She had to get to know me as a writer, because she told me, she was like, typically for a first-time author, she was like, you made it so difficult for yourself because you have so many characters and so many moving parts. And so, she told me, she said, you did a great job connecting everyone together. And so she was like, typically, for a first-time author, that I guess she was trying to say that the story, that I should have made it a little bit more simplistic in terms of just the moving parts and the story structure. But I think overall, she did a great job. Like I said, we bumped heads. And it was interesting because I was new to this, I went in and I accepted all of her edits. And then I started reading.
Uh-huh.
And I was reading and I was like, wait a minute, something is missing.
Yeah, that's not what I said. Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, something is missing, like a whole section. I was like, I know I wrote this a couple of years ago, but I was like, something is missing. And then something I saw where I was able to see those edits that I accepted, and she took a huge part of it out. And I was like, why did you take that part out? And she's like, oh, I didn't think it was necessary. And I was like, that's a critical part of the story. So I was asking her, were you editing as you were going, or did you read the book first? Because there was a lot of, suspenseful things that were coming up. And I was like, had you waited another chapter or so, it would have answered the question that you had, So, like I said, we bumped heads a little bit, but I think it was a learning experience for the both of us. I'm glad because I asked a couple of readers about that particular scene in the book, and they were like, oh, no, we loved it. Another editor.
That's who counts.
Yeah, exactly. And then another editor that told me that I had too much backstory. And for me, I like to read. When I read, I want to know the backstory on not all of the characters, but I want to know information. So, like right now, for example, I'm working with a gentleman who is writing about growing up in the 90s. And, he was talking about the crime and things like that. And And I told him, I suggested that, and I'm not his editor, but I'm just kind of walking him through the whole process. And I was like, maybe you could mention about the crime bill, because that bill was established around that time. I don't know. What do you think, Steve? Do you like to give the backstory, or because you kind of laughed about that?
Well, I didn't give a lot of backstory when I'm talking about the Chronocar and the son of a slave who invents the time machine. When I first, I'll put it to you this way, when I first submitted the manuscript, what is now Chapter 3 was Chapter 1. And everyone kept saying, well, I want to know more about Dr. Johnson. So I wrote 2 whole chapters about how we got started, and people loved it. In fact, one of my books may be all about what led up to this, because people want the backstory.
Wow.
The guy escapes. He's working as a railroad construction guy, and he gets in trouble, gets into a fight with a white man. He has to leave. He enrolls in Tuskegee, only to find out they don't teach physics. But he manages to get a physics degree anyway. You have to read the story to figure out how that happened. But people want to know, well, where did he come from? How did he get started? And I'm seriously thinking about writing a book just about him, his childhood, and how he got to where he is.
I think if people love his story, if you probably would do good with that, because, I love that story, but that's the historian in me. So
well, no,
I want to know
that's
what happened.
Sure. It's just that I got another novel I want to write first, so maybe that'll be
that's always
project
that's how
after the next one. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you guys, I haven't asked you that many questions, and I've just sat here and listened to you guys have y'all conversation. I was like enthralled over here. I'm not even interrupting because they're asking great questions, and so I've had a great.
I love talking to other authors. I really
do.
Yes.
I'm sitting here listening to Steve and all the different things, and I'm like, man, I'm learning so much. I'm going to get your books because I got to learn so much more. I write romance, but I got into this this book that I'm working on now is the adult books of a middle grade book that I'm working on. And so I had why would the parents decide to move to this planet? And so this is the story I'm doing now is their story. I've written the middle grade book, and my kids are like, when is that coming out? But this book here has just been trying to figure out where it fits in the genre world and the terminology, because I write romance. I've never written science fiction, paranormal, or it's got an alien in it, so that puts it in the paranormal stage, and it's I'm like fantasy.
It's what you make it.
Yeah, so I'm like, I've just been enjoying writing this book and learning the genre and learning that I've always loved it. I just didn't know that.
There you go.
So I'm enjoying it. I really appreciate you all being on the show tonight. Can you tell our readers our listeners how they can get in touch with you online?
Well, you can go to my website, stevebellinger.com. Everything is there. In fact, you can even order autographed books from there. You can listen to my radio dramas that I did back in the 1970s. And I have a whole gallery of celebrities that I've met in my lifetime. So there's enough on my website to keep you entertained for about an hour.
Wow.
That's a great website. Go ahead, Olivia.
Well, you can reach me. You can visit my website, thefortunatefall.com. There's information about me. There's a synopsis. And there's a book trailer. There's also I did a playlist of music that I listened to while I was writing, And so I have that playlist, and it's classic soft rock, 70s, 80s music.
That's very
which I
interesting.
enjoy listening.
Yeah.
That I enjoy listening to. And so I have that on my, I like to say that it's the soundtrack of the book. And so so it's from Spotify. So if you go directly to Spotify, you can just look up The Fortunate Fall, and the playlist will come up. So there's some really, if you're into like Stevie Nicks and music, some old Chaka and Kenny Loggins, and so many great music is on there. And you can also follow me on social media. On Facebook, author Olivia Almagro, and Instagram, I believe it's Olivia PR or Olivia 1390. You can find me. So I love connecting with readers to hear what they have to say, and I love just connecting with folks.
Absolutely.
This was great. Thank you. I hope what our guest shared today was helpful for you. I know I learned a lot of things. I want to thank our sponsor, Building Your Readership by LaShaunda Hoffman. Check the show notes for the link to purchase. I want to thank you, our listeners, for taking time to listen to the podcast. I have my 3 questions for you. Did you learn something from this episode? If you did, please share the podcast with your community. Would you like to be a guest for an episode? Contact me at onestormeg@gmail.com. And my last question, have you promoted your book or business today? If you haven't, go showcase those wings. Someone needs what you have to offer. This is LaShaunda Hoffman, and I will see you on the next.